If you haven't read it, basically it's a post-mortem on a a bug that was in the follow-up emails that were sent out nightly, and it basically backed all of these up for a couple months to where it sent out 3,625 emails on July 4th, or the morning of July 4th. So I woke up to a lot of noise from people kind of telling me, hey, I think something's wrong, which was nice. Most people were pretty cool about it. There were a couple of people that were kind of like, stop spamming me, which, of course, it was annoying and embarrassing. So the issue ended up being the null, one of the email addresses was null in the system. And because of that, the queue that was running, let's just look at the code, shall we? The queue that was running was, this is the follow-up email queue. So basically it would get all of the people that hadn't received a follow-up in the last basically 48 hours. And if they were a certain type of shift, I would send them an email and say, hey, how'd it go, and so forth. But because that very first order had an email address of null, it was effectively dying trying to send out that. And so it would just fail this scheduled command that would run at 3 a.m. and just stop for the day. And the next day it would try again. It was still the first email, and it would stop. And it did that for months, over months. And then basically, I fixed this person's email because they had not been able to sign into Shift. It was causing other issues in the application because the application assumed that you would never have a null email. In fact, if we look at the create users table, it doesn't allow null. It's not a nullable field. And so because of that, this should have never happened, but it was grandfathered into the system that they had a null email address kind of before I made that constraint in the database. I think originally I allowed it to be null. And so, again, over the course of 3 years of making evolutionary changes to Shift, it just kind of snuck in there. And they were the only one that had a null email address. So anyways, long story short, that is the issue. Oh, good, we got some people watching now. Thumbs down? How'd I get a thumbs down? That's hardcore. Uh, anyways, let's see here. So it shouldn't be allowed in the system any longer, but because I want to just kind of make sure this could never happen again, just want to feel super confident, I want to update the tests. And what I did, and I mentioned this in the blog post, what I did was in the GitHub service provider. What is it? It's the Git service provider. It's not just GitHub. There's other things that are supported. So I quickly threw in this abort 409 if they had an email address. And this was kind of the patch that I talked about. But I don't have a test around this. So while this was kind of the quick hot fix, it's not something that is tested. So I want to just make sure, because obviously this led to a really nasty bug. And even though I've massaged the data, made sure the database, there's no other nulls, I've gotten everything to the way I expected, I don't want this to somehow be introduced into the application again. So at the point of contact where someone is creating or signing up for an account, the only chance for them to null out their email address would be if their account was created with a null email address. And again, the database constraint should protect against this because it's not a nullable column. But just to, again, help me sleep at night, make sure I'm not going to spam another 3,000 people someday, let's go ahead and make sure that this abort 409 is firing correctly. So I'm going to comment this out and just kind of drive it with the test. So let's just pull this over here. And just for sanity, I have run these tests, but just to demonstrate, we see here that there's actually, I did run a test for it, I think. Look at that. I'm already ahead of the game. Well, we'll backfill it anyways. So I am failing when I don't have that particular 409. So let's just take a look at that test that I added. So let's go here, and somewhere in all the course of my tests, I have a 409 somewhere. So let's check that out. Where is that? There it is. Callback returns a 409 when the email is null. So let's take a look and just kind of review this particular test to make sure this line is working out. So I mock out Socialite and the driver. and basically set those up to give me back a certain bit of data. So in this case, I'm just going to attempt to log in with GitHub, and it's going to return the GitHub mock driver. And at that point, I can return a set of user data. So it just generates some user data. In this case, all just fake stuff. But the email address is a fake email. And if I go back and we take a look, I'm forcibly overwriting that email to be null. So basically, the driver's set up as GitHub. It's going to get a call to user. It's going to give me that data back, which has a null email address. That's going to trigger this particular guard clause to make sure that that 409 is happening. I also just make sure that I put out a log, this error log. That's just important to me because I am trolling the logs. I have this set up to push over to Sentry, to push to Slack. So I want to make sure I kind of get alerted of that quickly. So I have a chance to reach out to the user and say, hey, I saw, that you had this. Or if they reach out to me and say I can't log in, I can be like, what's your nickname on, GitHub or whatever the provider is. So I've got all that set up, again, just to make sure, because that log is important. Most of the time I wouldn't necessarily check log output, but in this case it is an important thing I want to do. So I'm actually going to make the call, and at that point, that's where I assert the 409. I make sure that they don't set up any kind of connection, that they're still a guest, they're not logged in, nothing else that's below this code played on, right? I didn't get redirected, I didn't get automatically logged in, no user account was created, right? So I query for all users, it's empty. I query for all connections, it's empty. Everything's good there. So this was the test that I added. I didn't think that it was already in there, but let's just go ahead and enable that back, and we'll see that everything's passing. Great. So let's go back and take a look at this follow-up emails bit. I could write a test for this particular console. It would be a fair amount of setup because I would want to obviously seed the test database with a lot of different records to make sure different things were happening. But again, because I feel pretty confident that null can never be introduced into the application, it's not necessarily something that's going to kind of keep me up at night. But instead, if I was really worried about it, I could drive out something along the lines of like is order user email. Basically, if this is null, I would want to, oh, thanks PHP Storm, order, there we go. Then I could do something like continue, or I could make sure that, their follow-up sent or whatever. So, and if I spell continue right, PHP Storm wouldn't be so mad at me. So, wow, we are way off. There we go. Okay, that's the proper syntax. So anyways, we would continue past that. That way we know we're kind of always playing on from that particular email address. And again, I could log something out. I could email myself. I could let myself know that, hey, my assumption about the application, I had the wrong one. Somehow someone still has a null email address. Because of the other checks, though, I'm not going to worry about this particularly too much. Again, testing's about confidence, not about coverage. This doesn't concern me that much at the moment. This is also kind of an ever-changing piece of code. Some would argue that, means maybe it should have more tests, and again, maybe I'll do that in a future video, but not something I'm worried about today. What mattered most to me is that you can actually log in, you can actually use Shift. This is something that kind of happens on the later down the road. So you might not even order a shift. So for today, this was the most important piece. I want to make sure people are getting it in the application, they're using the service, and it's not, broken for them or causing it to be broken for other users. So let's see if there's any questions. Feel free to send anything across. Got a few people watching here, so shoot those over. I think they come across in my little video. I'm using Ecamm Live for managing the live stream, so I'm pretty sure it kicks over comments. Maybe someone can send one across to test. But yeah, good. So hopefully that was helpful. Again, pretty short, just wanted to keep it nice and easy. If you're interested in that kind of full bug that happened, you can kind of check this out on my blog. This was just kind of a fun little follow-up through some emojis in here, talked about kind of the 5 whys to get at the heart of the problem, because in the moment it's something that, definitely is kind of frantic. You're kind of in panic mode. You're making a lot of knee-jerk reactions, and you got to kind of stick it through and get systematic and kind of track down that error. Because at first I thought, oh gosh, what am I doing in here? I didn't even think at all that it was null. Again, my assumption of the application was that you could never have a null email address. So this particular code is going to protect against that. I know that this is strongly tested, so I can feel confident that no one's ever going to get into the system with a null email address again. As such, I'm not necessarily going to spend my time writing the complex test to kind of test this today. Again, it might be something I revisit in a future bit, but that's kind of my reasoning for not worrying about this. Again, for me, testing is about confidence, not coverage, and as such, I don't really want to write all the seeders to kind of set this particular query up and go through the complex if statements here. So, and the for each loop. It's a test that's maybe worth it, but just not today. So, anyways, welcome your feedback. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. I'll probably do another one of these after Laracon. Again, maybe on that particular console command based on your feedback. So, thanks for taking a minute to watch this, and again, see you all next time.